When did you stop being the bigger person? I watched Sarah Walsh present my slides to the Meridian Corp executives, her perfectly manicured finger clicking through PowerPoint slides I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. Every chart, every graph, every carefully crafted talking point, mine. She stood there in her designer blazer, soaking up nods of approval from the C-suite while I sat in the back corner, invisible as always. This innovative approach to client retention could increase revenue by 23% over the next fiscal year, Sarah said, gesturing to the slide that had cost me 14-hour days and countless cups of cold coffee. The same slide I emailed her yesterday morning with the subject line, draft presentation for your review. Please provide feedback. Feedback. What a joke. Mr. Patterson, our VP of Operations, leaned forward with interest. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy we need. How did you develop this model? I held my breath. This was it, the moment she'd have to admit she didn't understand a single formula on those slides. The moment she'd finally get caught. Instead, Sarah launched into a flawless explanation of my methodology, using the exact phrases from my research notes. Word for word. She'd memorized my own work better than some people memorize their wedding vows. Brilliant work, Sarah, Patterson said, making notes. I want to implement this company-wide. Can you have a full rollout plan by Friday? Absolutely, Sarah replied without missing a beat, already knowing she'd dumped that task on me by lunch. I pressed my nails into my palms hard enough to leave crescents. 2 years. 2 years of this exact scenario playing out in different conference rooms with different executives. 2 years of watching Sarah climb the corporate ladder using my back as her personal stepping stone. It started small. Sarah forgot to include my name on email chains, took credit for my ideas in casual conversations, volunteered me for her grunt work while she networked at company happy hours. I told myself I was being professional. Taking the high road. Building character or whatever other bullshit I fed myself to sleep at night. Then came the promotion I should have gotten last spring. The senior marketing coordinator position that had my name written all over it until Sarah whispered poison in all the right ears. Suddenly, I was too inexperienced and not ready for leadership responsibilities while Sarah waltzed into the role I'd been working toward for 18 months. But this was different. This wasn't just taking credit for a casual suggestion or stealing a minor project idea. This was grand theft of my career's biggest break, performed in front of the people who could change everything for me. This was Sarah literally reading my words, presenting my research, and accepting praise for the work that had consumed my life for the past month. As the meeting wrapped up and executives filed out congratulating Sarah on her innovative thinking, she caught my eye across the room. For just a second, her mask slipped. She wasn't smug or satisfied. She was terrified. Because we both knew she'd finally crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, while Sarah basked in handshakes and promises of fast-tracked career advancement. My advancement. Built on my work. That's when I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The part of me that had been saying, be patient, and take the high road, and don't stoop to her level, finally went quiet. Because I realized Sarah had been counting on my integrity all along. She'd weaponized my professionalism against me. Well, not anymore. I didn't go back to my desk. Instead, I walked straight to the parking garage and sat in my Honda Civic for 23 minutes, hands shaking as I stared at my phone. The smart thing would be to go back upstairs, congratulate Sarah on her brilliant presentation, and start working on that rollout plan she'd inevitably assign me by 2 p.m. The smart thing would be to keep my head down for another 2 years until I could transfer departments or find another job. But as I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from my teammate Marcus. Dude, what happened in there? Sarah's telling everyone you missed the presentation because you were too overwhelmed to attend. She's asking me to take over your current projects because you're struggling with the workload. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just stealing credit anymore, she was actively sabotaging my reputation in real time. While I was sitting in my car having an existential crisis, Sarah was upstairs spinning a narrative that I was incompetent and unreliable. I called Marcus immediately. Please tell me you didn't believe her, I said without preamble. Are you kidding? I saw you in that meeting. You looked like you were about to murder someone. Marcus lowered his voice. What's really going on? She stole my presentation. The whole thing. Every slide, every statistic, every recommendation, I created all of it. Silence. Then, Jesus. Can you prove it? Could I prove it? I pulled up my laptop and started scrolling through files. The original presentation, saved to my desktop 3 weeks ago. Email timestamps showing when I'd sent drafts to myself. Research documents with my name embedded in the metadata. Version history showing 18 different revisions, all traced back to my computer. Yeah, I said, feeling something cold and determined settling in my chest. I can prove it. But even as I said it, I knew proof wasn't enough. I'd had proof before, proof that Sarah had taken credit for the client retention survey I designed last fall, proof that she'd claimed my budget optimization spreadsheet as her own work, proof that she'd thrown me under the bus when the Hartley project timeline got delayed because of her mistakes. Proof was worthless if no one wanted to see it. That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. Last month, I'd been working late when I heard Sarah on a phone call in her office. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her door was cracked and she wasn't exactly keeping her voice down. Trust me, getting rid of him won't be a problem, she'd said. I've been documenting everything, missed deadlines, quality issues, attitude problems. HR is already concerned about his performance. Give it another month and I'll have enough to justify letting him go. At the time, I'd assumed she was talking about some underperforming vendor or external contractor. Now I realized she'd been talking about me. Sarah hadn't just been stealing my work, she'd been building a case to have me fired while she did it. The truly sick part. All those missed deadlines and quality issues she was documenting were probably the direct result of her dumping her work on me while taking credit for my actual accomplishments. I opened my laptop and started making a list. Every stolen idea, every false accusation, every meeting where she blamed me for her failures. If Sarah wanted to play documentation games, fine. I'd been keeping my own records, I just hadn't realized I was going to need them for war. Because that's what this was now. War. And I was done fighting fair. The parking garage suddenly felt suffocating. I needed air, space to think, and most importantly, I needed to figure out exactly how deep Sarah's sabotage went before I made my next move. I drove to the Starbucks 3 blocks from our office and commandeered a corner table, spreading out my laptop and a legal pad like I was planning a military campaign. Because in a way, I was. First, I pulled up every email exchange I'd had with Sarah over the past 6 months. Thank God for my obsessive habit of keeping detailed records, a quirk that had always annoyed my ex-girlfriend but was about to save my career. The patterns were damning once I laid them out chronologically. Every time I'd sent Sarah a draft or asked for her input on a project, she'd somehow presented a remarkably similar idea to management within 48 hours. The Meridian presentation was just the most blatant example. But it was the metadata that really made my blood boil. I pulled up the file properties on the presentation Sarah had just delivered. Last modified, yesterday at 11:47 p.m. by Sarah Walsh. But the original creation date? 3 weeks ago, 2:33 a.m., created by me on my personal laptop during one of many sleepless nights. She hadn't even bothered to create a new file. She'd literally stolen mine and done a find and replace on the attribution. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, emergency team meeting in conference room B, Sarah's calling it reorganizing for efficiency. Translation, she's about to screw you over again. I was 20 minutes away, but I texted back, be there in 10. And Marcus? Start recording on your phone if you can do it discreetly. Why? Trust me. I broke at least 3 traffic laws getting back to the office and slipped into conference room B just as Sarah was launching into what sounded like a prepared speech. My entire team was there, Marcus, Jenny, David, and poor intern Katie who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Which is why I'm recommending we redistribute some responsibilities, Sarah was saying, consulting a typed agenda that definitely hadn't existed an hour ago. Given recent performance concerns, I think it's best if we move the Hartley account management to David and shift the quarterly reports to Jenny. My accounts. She was reassigning my biggest accounts while I sat in a parking garage having an existential crisis. What performance concerns? Jenny asked, looking genuinely confused. The Hartley account has been running smoothly since the transition. Sarah's smile was pure poison. Well, there was the missed deadline on the initial proposal, the client complaint about communication delays, and the budget discrepancy that I had to personally resolve with accounting. Every single item on that list was a lie. Worse than a lie, they were problems that Sarah herself had created and then blamed on me. The missed deadline. Sarah had sat on the proposal for 4 days, reviewing it, then sent it to the client without telling me, making it look like I'd been unresponsive to their follow-up questions. The client complaint. Mr. Hartley had called me directly to say how impressed he was with our response time. Sarah had somehow spun his praise into a complaint about unclear communication channels. And the budget discrepancy. That was Sarah's math error from when she'd insisted on reviewing my numbers and input them wrong into the system. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email thread with Mr. Hartley, dated just last week. I wanted to personally thank you for the exceptional service on our account. Your attention to detail and quick response times have exceeded our expectations. Please pass along my compliments to your supervisor. Actually, I said, interrupting Sarah mid-sentence about accountability measures, I think there might be some confusion about the Hartley account performance metrics. The room went silent. Sarah's perfectly practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. I'm sorry, she said, her tone suggesting I should definitely be sorry for interrupting. Mr. Hartley sent a commendation email last Tuesday. Would you like me to read it to the team? I watched the color drain from Sarah's face as she realized she'd walked into a trap of her own making. Time to spring it. I turned my laptop screen toward the team and read Mr. Hartley's email aloud, watching Sarah's face cycle through expressions like a broken slot machine. Confusion. Panic. Then that calculating look I knew meant she was already spinning a counter-narrative. That's wonderful, she said smoothly, but one positive email doesn't negate the systemic issues I've been tracking. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Actually, I have the documentation right here, I interrupted, pulling up a folder I'd labeled Hartley account, complete record. Mr. Hartley's initial proposal was submitted 2 days early, on March 15th instead of March 17th. The communication log shows response times averaging 1.2 hours during business hours, well below our 24-hour standard. Marcus leaned forward, suddenly interested. Wait, didn't you tell us last week that the Hartley account was behind schedule? Sarah's laugh sounded like breaking glass. I think there's some miscommunication here. The proposal timeline I was referring to was the Q2 expansion project, not the initial. The Q2 expansion was delivered March 28th, I said, clicking to another file. Client requested delivery by March 30th. 2 days early. Jenny was frowning now, looking between Sarah and me like she was watching a tennis match. So which account had the performance issues? The beautiful thing about Sarah's web of lies was that she'd gotten so comfortable spinning them, she'd never bothered to keep track of which story she told to whom. I'd been building a database of her contradictions for months without even realizing it. David, I said, turning to our senior account manager, when Sarah transferred the Morrison project to you last month, what reason did she give? David shifted uncomfortably. She said you were overwhelmed with the Hartley workload and couldn't handle the additional responsibility. But the Morrison transfer happened March 8th, and I didn't get assigned Hartley until March 12th. I have the project assignment emails. The room fell silent except for the aggressive clicking of my keyboard as I pulled up timestamped evidence. Sarah's perfectly composed mask was starting to crack around the edges. I think we're getting lost in minor administrative details, Sarah said, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. The important thing is team efficiency going forward. Is it true you told HR that I missed the Meridian presentation this morning because I was overwhelmed? I asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. Marcus's head snapped up. You were literally sitting 3 seats away from me in that meeting. And took detailed notes, Jenny added helpfully. I saw you writing when Patterson asked about the retention model methodology. Sarah's laugh was getting more brittle by the second. I never said he missed the meeting. Perhaps there was some miscommunication with HR about scheduling conflicts. My phone buzzed with a text. Then another. And another. I glanced down to see messages from 3 different coworkers, all forwarding the same email thread. My stomach dropped as I read the timestamp, sent 20 minutes ago, while we'd been sitting in this meeting. The subject line read, Performance Concerns, Confidential HR Review. Sarah had CC'd herself on an email to our HR director, Linda Morrison, outlining my recent behavioral issues and declining work quality. She'd sent it from her phone during our team meeting, probably while I was reading the Hartley commendation email. But she'd made one critical mistake. In her rush to cover her tracks, she'd accidentally sent it to the entire team distribution list instead of just HR. I held up my phone so everyone could see the screen. Sarah, did you mean to send this to all of us? The email was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. She detailed my failure to attend crucial client meetings, false, my inability to collaborate effectively with team members, ironic, and my concerning pattern of missed deadlines and quality issues, projection. She'd even included a recommendation that I be placed on a performance improvement plan immediately. The kicker was the final paragraph. I've been covering for his deficiencies for months, but I can no longer in good conscience allow his poor performance to reflect on the entire department. Katie, our intern, spoke up for the first time in the meeting, but didn't you just present his retention strategy this morning? The one he's been working on for weeks. And there it was. The question that tied everything together. Sarah looked around the room at 5 faces that were no longer buying her performance. Her power had always come from controlling information, keeping everyone isolated, making sure no one ever compared notes. But now we were all comparing notes, and the picture wasn't pretty. I said carefully, it's time we had a conversation with Linda Morrison. All of us. Together. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face had gone completely white, and I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate a way out of the corner she backed herself into. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice barely steady. That email was a draft that got sent accidentally. I was simply documenting potential concerns to discuss privately. A draft? Marcus interrupted, pulling up the email on his own phone. It's addressed directly to Linda Morrison with a formal recommendation for disciplinary action. That's not a draft, Sarah. That's a hit job. Jenny was scrolling through her phone now too. There are timestamps going back weeks. Sarah, you've been sending HR reports about team members without any of us knowing. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What timestamps? What other reports? Jenny's face had gone pale. There's one here about David from 2 weeks ago. Something about concerns regarding client communication protocols after the Reynolds account meeting. David's head snapped up. What? The Reynolds meeting went perfectly. They signed a contract extension the next day. I was already pulling up my laptop, logging into our shared team folder where Sarah kept meeting notes and project updates. If she'd been systematically building cases against multiple team members, there would be traces. Sarah was meticulous about documentation. It was one of her few genuine skills. Look at this, I said, turning my screen toward the group. Sarah's been keeping individual files on each of us. David, there's a folder labeled D_performance_issues with 16 documents. Jenny, you've got 12 entries dating back to January. Marcus leaned over my shoulder. What's in them? I clicked on David's folder first. The files were brutal, detailed reports of every small mistake, every minor delay, every client interaction that could be twisted into a negative narrative. Sarah had been building termination cases against half our team. Jesus Christ, David whispered, reading over my shoulder. She documented that I took a long lunch on March 3rd to deal with my kid's school emergency. She made it sound like I was chronically absent. Jenny's folder was worse. Sarah had been tracking her bathroom breaks, timing her lunch hours, and documenting every personal phone call. One entry from last month read, Jay appears to be conducting personal business during work hours. Observed 14-minute phone conversation with what appeared to be healthcare provider. Recommend monitoring for pattern of abuse. That was my mom's oncologist, Jenny said quietly, her voice shaking. She'd just finished chemo, and they were giving me her test results. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't awkward, it was furious. I could feel the collective anger building as we all realized how thoroughly Sarah had been manipulating us, turning us against each other while systematically building cases to destroy our careers. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. There's another folder, I said, clicking on a file labeled team_restructure_proposal. It's a formal recommendation to eliminate 3 positions from our department. The document was dated last Friday, just 4 days ago. Sarah had prepared a detailed analysis of why our team was overstaffed and underperforming, complete with recommendations for which employees should be terminated. David's name was at the top of the list, followed by Jenny's, then mine. The reasoning was masterful in its manipulation. She'd woven together all of her fabricated performance issues into a compelling narrative about dead weight dragging down department efficiency. According to her analysis, eliminating 3 team members would save the company $180,000 annually while improving overall productivity. She'd even included a timeline, recommend terminations by April 15th, complete restructuring by May 1st. Today was April 8th, we have exactly 1 week, I said, showing them the timeline. She's planning to submit this to Patterson next Friday. That's when Marcus noticed something else. Look at the bottom of the document. She's not just recommending terminations, she's recommending her own promotion to senior department manager, with a $25,000 salary increase and authority to hire her own replacement team. The audacity was breathtaking. Sarah hadn't just been stealing our work and sabotaging our careers for fun, she'd been systematically destroying us to create an opening for herself to take over the entire department. We need to call Linda Morrison right now, Jenny said, standing up abruptly. But Sarah was already moving toward the door. I think this meeting has gotten out of hand. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and discuss this rationally. Sit down, Sarah, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. For the first time in 2 years, she actually listened to me. We're not calling HR yet, I said, closing my laptop with deliberate calm. Not until we understand exactly how deep this goes. Sarah's eyes darted toward the door again, but Marcus had quietly moved to block her exit. Smart guy. What do you mean? Jenny asked, though I could see she was already connecting the dots. I pulled out my phone and opened my email app. Sarah, you've been so thorough with your documentation. I'm curious, when you sent Linda Morrison that performance review about me this morning, did you mention that you were simultaneously presenting my work as your own to the executive team? Sarah's jaw tightened. I have no idea what you're talking about. The Meridian presentation. You know, the one you delivered 47 minutes ago using slides I created? I scrolled through my sent folder. Here's the email I sent you yesterday at 9:23 a.m. with the complete presentation attached. Subject line, draft presentation for your review, please provide feedback. I turned my phone toward the team. And here's the automatic read receipt showing Sarah opened it at 9:31 a.m. David was staring at Sarah like he'd never seen her before. You stole his presentation. That's a gross oversimplification, Sarah said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. We collaborate on many projects. Sometimes the lines of individual contribution can become blurred. Blurred? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, you used my exact methodology, my research citations, even my formatting. You copied the footnotes. Katie, who'd been silent this entire time, suddenly spoke up. Is that why you asked me to print out copies of his research files last Thursday? You said it was for a collaborative review process. My stomach dropped. What research files? Katie looked miserable. The client retention data, the market analysis spreadsheets, all your notes from the Meridian discovery calls. She had me print everything and bind it in presentation folders. With whose name on the cover? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Hers, Katie whispered. I thought it was weird, but she's my supervisor, so. Sarah was trapped and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she went on the offensive. This is exactly the kind of paranoid, conspiracy thinking that I've been documenting in his performance reviews. He sees malicious intent in normal collaborative processes. Collaborative? Marcus interrupted. You literally told us in last month's team meeting that you developed the retention strategy independently. You said it was based on personal research and innovative thinking. I said I'd contributed to the strategic framework. You said you developed it, Jenny corrected firmly. I wrote it down because I wanted to remember your exact words. You said, quote, this retention model represents my personal approach to client relationship optimization. I was starting to understand why Sarah had been so confident. She'd been running this con for so long, she'd probably convinced herself that her version of events was the truth. But now, with all of us in the same room comparing stories, her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart in real time. Let me ask you something else, I said, pulling up another file. When you recommended David for that client communication coaching last month, the one that went on his permanent HR record, were you aware that his client satisfaction scores were actually 23% above department average? Sarah's face went completely blank. I don't know what scores you're referring to. The quarterly client feedback reports that Linda Morrison sends to all team leads, David said slowly. You get the same reports I do, Sarah. You knew exactly what my satisfaction scores were. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah hadn't just been opportunistically stealing credit and shifting blame, she'd been deliberately sabotaging team members whose success threatened her advancement. How long? Jenny asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? I opened Sarah's restructuring proposal again and scrolled to the metadata. The first draft was created 8 months ago. She's been working on this since last August. 8 months. Sarah had been systematically destroying our careers for 8 months while smiling to our faces and pretending to be our mentor and colleague. But then I noticed something in the document properties that made my blood freeze. There's a version history, I said, clicking through the file details. 17 different drafts over 8 months. And look at this, she's been updating it every time one of us had a success or failure. I opened the revision timeline. Every time David had landed a new client, Sarah had updated his section to emphasize inconsistent performance patterns. When Jenny had received that commendation for the Morrison project, Sarah had added notes about concerning perfectionist tendencies that slow team productivity. And every time I'd worked late to cover for Sarah's mistakes, she documented it as evidence that I was struggling to manage basic workload expectations. She'd been playing a long game, and we were all just pieces on her chessboard. There's something else, I said, scrolling deeper into Sarah's files. My hands were shaking now, partly from adrenaline and partly from the growing realization of how comprehensively she'd been manipulating all of us. I found a folder labeled executive_communications, buried 3 levels deep in her directory structure. When I opened it, my stomach dropped to my shoes. She's been forwarding our private emails to Patterson, I said, turning the screen so everyone could see. Look at this, David, remember that email you sent me last month complaining about the new client intake process? The one where you said it was bureaucratic nonsense that slows everything down. David nodded slowly, his face going pale. Sarah forwarded it to Patterson with a note saying you were resistant to necessary process improvements and showed concerning attitude problems regarding company policy. I kept scrolling, finding more examples. Jenny's frustrated email about working late 3 nights in a row, forwarded to HR with commentary about work-life balance issues. Marcus's joke about our outdated software system, reframed as unprofessional complaints about company resources. Jesus, Marcus whispered. She's been building a surveillance network. But the worst part was still coming. I found a subfolder labeled personal_intelligence that made my skin crawl. Sarah had been systematically gathering information about our personal lives, our vulnerabilities, our financial situations. David, how did she know about your divorce proceedings? I asked, pulling up a document titled D_personal_stressors_Q1. David's face went white. I never told anyone at work about that. My lawyer specifically said to keep it quiet until the custody hearing was finalized. According to this, she overheard you on a phone call with your attorney on February 18th. She documented the entire conversation, including the part where you discussed temporary child support payments. The room fell dead silent. Jenny was staring at Sarah like she was looking at a stranger. That's illegal, Katie said quietly. Recording private phone conversations without consent is illegal. She didn't record it, I said, reading further. She just documented everything she overheard. Dates, times, details about your custody arrangement, your ex-wife's demands, your lawyer's advice about asset division. But then I found something that made me feel physically sick. Sarah, I said, my voice deadly calm, why do you have Jenny's mother's chemotherapy schedule in this file? Jenny's head snapped up. What? I was looking at a detailed timeline of Jenny's mother's cancer treatment, including hospital names, appointment times, and prognosis information. Sarah had been tracking Jenny's family medical crisis like it was a project deliverable. This document shows that you knew Jenny's mom was having complications in early March, I continued. You knew she was in intensive care for 6 days. You knew Jenny was her primary caregiver. Jenny was shaking now. How could you possibly know all that? Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was concerned about team members going through personal difficulties. I thought documenting the situation would help me provide appropriate support. Support? Jenny exploded. You wrote me up for leaving early 3 times that week. You told Linda Morrison I was unreliable and couldn't handle my workload. I kept reading, feeling sicker by the minute. She documented that you took 14 personal calls during work hours between March 8th and March 15th. She noted that you seemed emotionally unstable and distracted. She recommended you be considered for stress leave. Those calls were from doctors and nurses, Jenny said, tears starting to form. My mom was dying, and I was trying to coordinate her care while still doing my job. You knew exactly what I was dealing with, and you used it against me. Sarah had gone completely silent, but I could see her mind still working, still calculating. Even now, even caught red-handed with evidence of her systematic manipulation, she was looking for an angle. That's when I realized we were missing something crucial. Marcus, I said, pull up your email and search for anything from Sarah in the last 2 weeks that mentions restructuring or efficiency improvements. Marcus started typing on his phone, then froze. Oh shit. She sent me something yesterday asking for my opinion on hypothetical staffing adjustments. She wanted to know which team members I thought were most essential and which ones might be redundant in a streamlined operation. What did you tell her? I thought it was just theoretical planning. I said. He trailed off, looking horrified. I said David and Jenny were solid performers but that you were probably the most technically skilled on the team. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sarah hadn't just been building termination cases against us, she'd been manipulating us into ranking each other for elimination. She'd been using our own words, our own assessments of each other, to justify her restructuring plan. That's why my performance review was so much harsher than David's and Jenny's, I realized. She needed me to look like the biggest liability because I was the biggest threat to her taking over my projects. Sarah finally looked up, and for the first time, her mask slipped completely. What I saw underneath wasn't remorse or shame, it was pure, calculating ambition. She'd been caught, but she wasn't sorry. She was just recalculating her next move. We're calling Linda Morrison now, I said, reaching for my phone. But Sarah was already standing, straightening her blazer like she was preparing for battle instead of surrender. I don't think that's necessary, she said, her voice regaining its professional composure. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the scope and intent of my administrative documentation. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before involving HR unnecessarily. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, even with all the evidence laid out, she was still trying to control the narrative. That's when I realized Sarah's biggest mistake wasn't getting caught. It was underestimating how angry we'd be when we found out. Actually, Sarah, I said, my finger hovering over Linda Morrison's contact, I think we're way past private discussions. But before I could dial, my phone rang. Linda Morrison's name flashed on the screen. My blood turned to ice. She's calling me. Sarah's face went from pale to triumphant in about 2 seconds. That calculating look was back, and I realized she played one more card I hadn't seen coming. I answered on speaker. Hello, Linda. Hi there. I need you to come to my office immediately. We've received some serious concerns about your recent performance and conduct that need to be addressed right away. The room fell silent. Sarah was actually smiling now, not her fake professional smile, but something genuine and predatory. Linda, I said carefully, I think there might be some misinformation. We can discuss it when you get here. And please bring any materials related to the Meridian account. There are questions about project ownership and professional conduct that need clarification. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Sarah hadn't just been building a case against me, she'd been feeding Linda Morrison a steady stream of fabricated evidence while I sat in conference rooms being the professional, reasonable one. I'll be right there, I said, ending the call. Sarah stood up, smoothing her skirt. I hope this helps everyone understand why proper documentation and communication protocols are so important. Sometimes difficult personnel decisions have to be made for the good of the team. She was already rewriting the narrative in real time. In her version of events, she was the responsible manager who discovered a problem employee and properly reported it through official channels. Everything we just uncovered would be reframed as paranoid accusations from someone facing legitimate performance concerns. You're not going alone, Marcus said, standing up. We're all going. That's not necessary, Sarah said quickly. HR meetings are confidential, and this really should be handled through proper administrative channels. Fuck your channels, Jenny said, her voice shaking with rage. You documented my mother's cancer treatment like it was a project milestone. You think I'm going to let you destroy him the way you tried to destroy all of us? But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Linda Morrison was expecting me to show up defensive and unprepared, probably with some hastily gathered evidence that Sarah had already discredited. That's how these situations usually played out, the victim scrambling to prove their innocence while the manipulator sat calmly with months of carefully curated documentation. Actually, I said, grabbing my laptop, Sarah's right. This should go through proper channels. Everyone stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Which is why I'm going to email Linda Morrison a comprehensive report right now, before I walk into her office. With all of you CC'd, plus Patterson, plus our department director. Sarah's smile faltered. I don't think that's The beautiful thing about proper documentation, I continued, typing rapidly, is that it creates a permanent record. Timestamps, metadata, version histories. All the things you've been so good at tracking, Sarah. I was attaching everything: Sarah's restructuring proposal, her surveillance files, the stolen presentation with metadata showing my authorship, screenshots of her accidentally sent HR emails. Every piece of evidence we'd uncovered in the last hour. Subject line, I said, reading as I typed, urgent, evidence of systematic employee surveillance, document theft, and fraudulent performance reporting by Sarah Walsh. Sarah lunged for my laptop, but David blocked her. Send it, Jenny said. I hit enter. Within 30 seconds, my phone started buzzing with responses. Patterson's reply came first, conference room A. Everyone. Now. Sarah's face had gone completely white. I think, I said, closing my laptop with a satisfying snap, it's time for that conversation with management. All of us. Together. The war was about to begin. The walk to conference room A felt like a death march, but not for the reasons I'd expected 20 minutes ago. Sarah walked ahead of us, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. She'd recovered from her momentary panic and was back in full corporate warrior mode, spine straight, chin up, probably already planning her opening statement. But I noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her phone. She'd been typing furiously during our elevator ride, no doubt trying to control the damage before we faced Patterson and Linda Morrison together. Did you see her sending messages? Marcus whispered as we approached the conference room. Probably trying to get ahead of the narrative, I murmured back. Classic Sarah move, reframe the story before anyone else can tell it. We filed into conference room A to find Patterson and Linda Morrison already seated at the massive oak table, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Patterson had his laptop open with what looked like my email chain displayed on the screen. Linda had a thick manila folder in front of her that made my stomach clench. Sarah's documentation, I realized. Months of carefully crafted lies presented in professional formatting. Please, everyone sit down, Patterson said, his voice carrying that particular tone executives use when they're about to deliver unpleasant news. This is an unusual situation, and we need to address it comprehensively. Sarah immediately claimed the seat closest to Patterson, a power move I should have seen coming. The rest of us spread out along the opposite side of the table like defendants at a tribunal. Before we begin, Linda Morrison said, opening her folder, I want to clarify that this meeting involves serious allegations of misconduct that could result in immediate termination from multiple parties. My blood ran cold. Multiple parties. Sarah had managed to flip the script so thoroughly that we were all potentially facing disciplinary action for exposing her fraud. Linda, Patterson said, glancing at his laptop screen, I just finished reviewing the materials that were sent to my office 17 minutes ago. The allegations are extensive. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Mr. Patterson, I believe what you're seeing is a coordinated effort to discredit legitimate performance management activities. As a supervisor, I have a responsibility to document concerning behaviors and report them through appropriate channels. Her voice was perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable. She sounded like the responsible adult in the room addressing a group of unruly children. The documentation in question, she continued, represents months of careful observation and record-keeping designed to help struggling team members improve their performance. It's unfortunate that this administrative process has been mischaracterized as something sinister. I watched Patterson's face as Sarah spoke. He was nodding slightly, and I realized with growing horror that her reframing was working. To someone who hadn't seen the evidence firsthand, Sarah's version sounded entirely plausible. Linda Morrison consulted her notes. The concerns I received this morning outlined a pattern of missed deadlines, quality issues, and unprofessional conduct spanning several months. These are serious allegations that require immediate investigation. What about the Meridian presentation? I interrupted, unable to stay silent any longer. Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. The Meridian presentation is an excellent example of the collaborative process I was describing. Multiple team members contributed research and ideas, and I synthesized those contributions into a cohesive strategy for client presentation. Synthesized. Jenny's voice cracked with disbelief. You literally copied his slides word for word. But Sarah was ready for that too. As team lead, it's my responsibility to ensure client presentations meet our quality standards. Sometimes that requires significant revision and reformatting of initial drafts to create professional deliverables. Patterson was looking at his laptop again, probably comparing Sarah's calm explanation with my frantic email evidence. I could see him calculating which version seemed more credible, the composed supervisor or the defensive employee. Mr. Patterson, I said, trying to keep my voice level, the metadata clearly shows. Metadata can be manipulated, Sarah interrupted smoothly. And given the accusations being made here, I think we need to consider the possibility that files may have been altered to support false claims. The room fell silent. Sarah had just accused me of fabricating evidence, and she'd done it so professionally that it sounded entirely reasonable. That's when I realized Sarah's endgame. She wasn't just trying to survive this meeting, she was positioning herself as the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign while simultaneously discrediting every piece of evidence we had against her. And it was working. Linda Morrison was consulting her folder again, cross-referencing something with the notes on her tablet. There's another issue we need to address, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Sarah, you sent me a formal recommendation this morning to place 3 team members on immediate performance improvement plans, with termination reviews scheduled for next Friday. My heart stopped. She was actually considering Sarah's elimination list. Given the timeline and severity of the documented issues, Linda continued, I was prepared to approve those recommendations. However, the allegations made in this afternoon's email suggest those recommendations may have been based on incomplete information. Sarah's confidence flickered for just a moment. The timeline was aggressive, I'll admit, but the performance issues have been escalating rapidly. I felt immediate intervention was necessary to prevent further deterioration. Deterioration of what, exactly? Patterson asked, pulling up another document on his laptop. Because according to our Q1 client satisfaction reports, this team had the highest performance ratings in the entire division. I felt a surge of hope. Patterson had the actual metrics. Individual client satisfaction doesn't always reflect internal team dynamics or operational efficiency, Sarah replied without missing a beat. There were significant concerns about collaboration, communication protocols, and adherence to company standards that don't necessarily show up in external client feedback. But Linda Morrison was frowning at something in her folder. Sarah, you submitted 14 separate incident reports over the past 6 weeks. That's unusual. Most supervisors submit 1 or 2 reports per quarter, if that. I believe in thorough documentation, Sarah said, but I caught a slight tightness in her voice. When multiple team members are experiencing performance issues simultaneously, it requires more intensive monitoring and intervention. Patterson looked up from his laptop. Can you walk me through the incident from March 22nd? You reported that David missed a critical client deadline, but I'm looking at an email from Reynolds Corporation dated March 23rd thanking him for early delivery of their quarterly analysis. David straightened in his chair. The Reynolds report was delivered 2 days ahead of schedule. Mr. Reynolds specifically mentioned in his follow-up call that our turnaround time was the fastest they'd experienced. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There may have been some confusion about which deliverable the incident report was referencing. We handle multiple projects simultaneously, and documentation timelines can sometimes overlap. No, Patterson interrupted, his voice sharper now. This report is very specific. March 22nd, Reynolds quarterly analysis, missed deadline resulting in client complaint. But there's no client complaint in our system, and Reynolds sent a commendation email the next day. The room fell silent except for the aggressive clicking of Patterson's keyboard as he cross-referenced more reports. Jenny, according to this incident report from March 15th, you were insubordinate during a team meeting and refused to accept project reassignment. Do you remember this meeting? Jenny's voice was steady. March 15th was the day I got the call that my mother was being rushed to emergency surgery. I asked if we could postpone the meeting so I could drive to the hospital. Sarah said the project reassignment was more important than my family emergency. Linda Morrison's pen had stopped moving. She was staring at Sarah with an expression I couldn't quite read. The incident report states that Jenny became emotionally volatile and stormed out of a mandatory team meeting, Patterson continued reading. There's no mention of a family medical emergency. Personal issues, while sympathetic, cannot excuse unprofessional workplace behavior, Sarah said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Emotional volatility in team settings creates a disruptive work environment regardless of the underlying cause. That's when Marcus spoke up. Sarah, I was in that meeting. Jenny asked permission to leave for a family emergency, you denied it, and she left anyway. She was completely professional about it. She even offered to call in from the hospital to discuss the project reassignment. Individual recollections of stressful situations often vary, Sarah replied, but she was starting to sound defensive rather than authoritative. Patterson was scrolling through more incident reports now, his frown deepening with each one. There's a pattern here, he said finally. Sarah, every single one of these reports describes behavior that directly contradicts either our client feedback or our internal performance metrics. Patterson pulled up another document on his laptop, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to something much darker. Sarah, I'm looking at your email logs from the past month. You've been forwarding internal team communications to my office without copying the original senders. My stomach clenched. This was worse than we'd realized. On March 28th, you forwarded a private conversation between Jenny and David about workload distribution. Your accompanying note suggested they were conspiring to undermine management decisions. Patterson's voice was getting colder. But when I read the actual conversation, they were discussing how to help cover each other's responsibilities during Jenny's family crisis. Sarah's composure was finally starting to crack. Inter-team communications that affect productivity fall under supervisory oversight responsibilities. You edited the email thread, Patterson interrupted. The original conversation was 12 messages long. You forwarded only 4 messages, and you removed the context that explained they were trying to maintain client service standards during a difficult period. Linda Morrison was typing rapidly on her tablet, her face grim. Sarah, selective editing of employee communications to create false narratives is a terminable offense under our ethics policy. But Patterson wasn't finished. There's more. I found 17 separate instances over the past 3 months where you forwarded partial conversations to either HR or my office, always removing context that would explain the employee's actual intent. He turned his laptop screen toward the table. Here's one from last week. You forwarded Marcus's email saying the new client intake system was a bureaucratic nightmare that's slowing everything down. But you cut out the part where he suggested 3 specific improvements and offered to stay late implementing them. Marcus leaned forward. I spent 6 hours that weekend building a streamlined process. Sarah told me it wasn't needed because the system was working as intended. According to this email thread I'm looking at now, Patterson continued, your working as intended system was causing an average delay of 48 hours per client onboarding. Marcus's improvements reduced that to 6 hours. Sarah's face had gone completely pale. I may have been overly cautious about implementing untested process changes. Overly cautious. Jenny's voice was shaking with rage. You told Mr. Patterson that Marcus was undermining company policy when he was actually solving a problem you've been ignoring for months. Linda Morrison closed her folder with a sharp snap. Sarah, I need you to explain the surveillance documentation we found in your files. Personal medical information, private phone conversations, family financial situations. How did you obtain this information, and why were you tracking it? For the first time since we'd sat down, Sarah looked genuinely cornered. I was simply maintaining awareness of factors that might affect team performance. You documented the exact dollar amounts of David's child support payments, I said, unable to stay quiet. You tracked Jenny's mother's chemotherapy appointments. You recorded my girlfriend's work schedule and noted when we had arguments that might affect my productivity. Patterson's head snapped up. You what? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Comprehensive performance management requires understanding the full range of factors that influence workplace behavior. That's stalking, Linda Morrison said flatly. Sarah, you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance on your own team members. This goes far beyond performance management into criminal territory. The room fell dead silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming and the distant sound of phones ringing in other offices. Sarah sat perfectly still, but I could see her mind racing, calculating one final desperate play. I want my union representative, she said quietly. Patterson closed his laptop with deliberate finality. Sarah, you're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out. Linda, I want complete forensic analysis of all her files and communications. But Sarah was already standing, straightening her blazer one last time. Even facing total destruction, she couldn't resist one final manipulation. I hope you're all satisfied, she said, looking directly at me. This department won't survive without proper leadership. Give it 6 months, and you'll understand why difficult decisions sometimes have to be made. Even now, she was still trying to plant seeds of doubt. Security arrived within 5 minutes, but Sarah was already gone. Linda Morrison found her office cleared out, computer wiped, filing cabinets emptied, even her desk plants removed. The only thing she'd left behind was a resignation letter dated 3 days ago, sitting prominently on her keyboard. She planned this, I said, staring at the letter through her office doorway. She knew exactly when to cut and run. Patterson was on his phone with IT, trying to recover Sarah's deleted files. How much of the server backup can you restore? Everything from the past 6 months. What do you mean, administratively deleted? My heart sank. Sarah had covered her tracks. She had administrative access to our shared drives, Marcus realized. She could have been erasing evidence for weeks. Linda Morrison was scrolling through her tablet, her face getting darker by the minute. This is worse than we thought. Sarah submitted formal termination paperwork for all 3 of you yesterday afternoon. The only reason it didn't go through was because I was in meetings and couldn't review it until today. Yesterday. Jenny's voice cracked. She was planning to fire us before we even discovered the presentation theft. According to this timeline, you would have been called into HR this morning for immediate termination meetings. The Meridian presentation was supposed to be Sarah's proof that the department could function more efficiently without redundant staff. I felt sick. While I'd been agonizing in that parking garage about whether to fight back, Sarah had already pulled the trigger. We'd been living on borrowed time without even knowing it. Patterson ended his call and turned to face us, his expression grim. IT found something interesting. Sarah's been using her administrative access to monitor all your email accounts for the past 4 months. Every message you sent, every draft you saved, she had real-time access to everything. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She knew about our client feedback, our project timelines, our personal conversations. She knew exactly what evidence you had and how to discredit it, Marcus finished. That's why she was always one step ahead. Linda Morrison pulled up something on her tablet. There's more. Sarah submitted a budget proposal last Friday requesting approval to hire 3 new junior associates at $32,000 per year to replace the current team. The cost savings would have been $156,000 annually. She was replacing us with cheap labor, David said flatly. And positioning herself as the efficiency expert who streamlined operations, I added, finally understanding the full scope of Sarah's plan. She would have gotten a promotion, a raise, and total control over rebuilding the department with people who'd be completely dependent on her. Patterson was typing rapidly on his phone. I'm calling an emergency meeting with the executive committee. This level of systematic fraud requires immediate damage control. But Jenny was staring at something on her own phone, her face pale. Sarah just posted on LinkedIn, she said quietly. She's announcing her new position at Hartwell and Associates. Senior Director of Client Strategy. Starting Monday. My blood ran cold. She had another job lined up. The announcement is timestamped 2 hours ago, Jenny continued reading. She thanks her former colleagues for the collaborative learning experience and mentions she's excited to implement innovative client retention strategies at her new firm. Marcus grabbed his phone. Hartwell and Associates, that's our biggest competitor. They've been trying to poach our Meridian account for 2 years. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She didn't just steal my presentation to get a promotion here, I said slowly. She stole it to take to Hartwell. She's been planning this move for months. Patterson's face had gone completely white. How much proprietary information did she have access to? Linda Morrison was already pulling up access logs. Client databases, financial projections, strategic planning documents. Sarah had level 4 clearance across all departments. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my hands started shaking. Thanks for the presentation materials. Looking forward to our pitch meeting with Meridian next week. S. Sarah hadn't just stolen my work. She'd stolen our entire client base and was about to sell it to our competition. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Patterson's phone rang 3 times in the next 5 minutes. Each call made his face darker. That was legal, he said after ending the 3rd call. Meridian Corp just received a presentation from Hartwell and Associates proposing the exact same retention strategy Sarah delivered this morning. They're confused because both proposals are essentially identical. My stomach lurched. How is that possible? The meeting was 4 hours ago. Sarah must have sent your materials to Hartwell before she even presented them here, Linda Morrison said, scrolling through access logs. Look at this, she downloaded the entire Meridian file at 6:47 a.m. this morning, 2 hours before our presentation. Marcus was staring at his phone in horror. Guys, check Sarah's LinkedIn again. She just posted a photo from Hartwell's office with the caption, excited to share my innovative client retention strategy with the team. The timestamp shows 11:23 a.m. That's during our meeting, Jenny realized. She was literally at Hartwell while Patterson was praising her presentation skills here. Patterson grabbed his desk phone. Get me Tom Meridian on the line immediately. He covered the receiver with his palm. If we've lost the Meridian account because of this, we're looking at a $2.3 million revenue loss. While Patterson dialed, I pulled up my laptop and started checking our other major accounts. What I found made my blood freeze. She downloaded everything, I said, scrolling through the access logs Linda had shared with us. Reynolds, Morrison Industries, Blackstone Corp, every major client file we have. David leaned over my shoulder. When? Over the past 6 weeks. Always during off hours when no one would notice the server activity. I kept scrolling, finding more evidence of Sarah's systematic data theft. She even accessed the proprietary algorithms I developed for the retention analysis. The ones that aren't supposed to exist outside our secure server. Linda Morrison's face had gone pale. Those algorithms are worth millions in licensing revenue. If Hartwell reverse engineers them and brings them to market first, we're fucked, Marcus finished bluntly. Patterson ended his call and immediately started dialing another number. Tom Meridian is furious. He wants to know why we're shopping the same proposal to competitors. I've got 15 minutes to explain before he cancels the contract and goes with Hartwell. What did you tell him? I asked. The truth. That we've been the victim of corporate espionage. Patterson's second call connected. This is Patterson. I need emergency legal counsel for theft of proprietary information. Yes, I understand the urgency. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah's number. By the way, Hartwell was very impressed with my retention algorithms. They're offering me a $40,000 signing bonus plus royalties on any client implementations. Thanks for making me rich. I showed the message to the room. Jenny actually gasped. She's taunting us, David said incredulously. She's actually taunting us. But Patterson was already 3 steps ahead. Linda, I need you to contact our cybersecurity team immediately. If Sarah had real-time email access for 4 months, she might have left monitoring software on our systems. You think she's still watching us? Marcus asked. I think she's been watching us this entire afternoon, I said, a chill running down my spine. She knew exactly when to clear out her office. She knew exactly when to submit that LinkedIn post. She's been tracking our response in real time. Linda Morrison was typing frantically on her tablet. IT confirms it. There's active monitoring software on all your computers. Sarah's been watching every email, every document, every conversation since January. Patterson slammed his hand on the table. She's probably listening to this meeting right now through the conference room system. The room fell dead silent as we all realized we'd been performing for an audience this entire time. Then my laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender was Sarah Walsh. The subject line read, "You should have taken the hint and left quietly." I stared at Sarah's email for a long moment before opening it, my finger hovering over the trackpad while everyone in the room held their breath. Read it out loud, Patterson said quietly. I clicked open the message and felt my blood turn to ice. You always were too stubborn for your own good, I read aloud. I gave you multiple opportunities to find another position quietly. The Morrison account handoff last month was supposed to be your exec. The missed promotion should have sent a clear message. Even the workload redistribution was designed to encourage you to seek opportunities elsewhere. My voice caught as I continued reading. But you insisted on staying, so I had to escalate the timeline. Hartwell needed a senior strategist with proven client retention expertise, and I needed a clean transition away from your increasingly problematic presence. Jenny was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone white. She's been planning your termination for months. There's more, I said, scrolling down. The Meridian presentation was always intended as my audition piece for Hartwell. Your research was thorough, your algorithms were brilliant, and your methodology was exactly what they needed to compete in the retention analytics market. Thank you for 18 months of unpaid product development. Patterson's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. She used our entire department as her personal R&D lab. She's not done, I said, my voice barely steady. The restructuring proposal I submitted yesterday wasn't meant to eliminate dead weight, it was meant to remove the 3 employees most likely to notice my transition to Hartwell. David's account management skills, Jenny's project coordination expertise, and your technical abilities represented the only real threat to my departure strategy. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking stunned. We weren't underperforming employees. We were loose ends. I kept reading, each word making me feel sicker. By the time you receive this message, I'll have completed my first week at Hartwell. The Meridian account will officially transfer on Friday, followed by Reynolds the following Monday. Morrison Industries is scheduled for Wednesday. Your department will lose approximately $4.2 million in annual revenue over the next 3 weeks. She stole our entire client base, David said, his voice hollow. Blackstone Corp has already signed a preliminary agreement based on the risk assessment protocols you developed last summer. I continued reading Sarah's message. Hartwell's legal team confirms that since the work was performed by an individual employee rather than under specific company contract, the intellectual property transfers with me to my new position. Patterson was already on his phone with legal again, but I could tell from his expression that the news wasn't good. The final paragraph, I said, my hands shaking now. Hartwell has offered me a partnership track position with equity stakes in any proprietary systems I develop using my previous research experience. Conservative projections suggest my retention methodology will generate $12 to $15 million in licensing revenue over the next 5 years. I'll be sure to send you a thank you card for my new beach house. The room fell silent except for the sound of Patterson's increasingly heated conversation with our legal department. When he hung up, his face was grim. Our non-compete clauses are unenforceable because Sarah never signed the updated employment agreement from last year's policy revision. Legally, she can take whatever knowledge she gained here and use it at Hartwell. What about the client contracts? Jenny asked. Most of our major accounts have 30-day cancellation clauses. If Sarah can prove she was the primary relationship manager and strategic developer, they can follow her to Hartwell without penalty. I stared at my laptop screen, rereading Sarah's final message. Then I noticed something that made my pulse spike. Patterson, I said slowly, what time did our legal department say this email was sent? He checked his phone. 4:47 p.m. Why? I turned my laptop screen toward him. Look at the timestamp. The email showed 4:51 p.m., 4 minutes in the future. That's impossible, Linda Morrison said, checking her watch. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. When I answered, Sarah's voice filled the conference room speaker. I'm still watching, she said simply, and hung up. The line went dead, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. The call ended, but something in Sarah's voice bothered me. She sounded different. Not triumphant or smug like I'd expected. She sounded desperate. Patterson, I said, a crazy idea forming. What if Sarah made a mistake? What kind of mistake? I pulled up my laptop and started typing furiously. She's been so focused on covering her tracks here, she might not have realized that Hartwell would do their own due diligence on her proprietary methods. Marcus caught on first. If they find out the algorithms aren't actually hers, they'll terminate her for fraud, I finished. And sue her for misrepresentation. I was already drafting an email to Tom Meridian. Patterson, I need you to contact every client Sarah claims to have developed relationships with. Ask them specifically who they worked with on their accounts. While Patterson started making calls, I pulled up the metadata on every document Sarah had stolen. What I found made me smile for the first time all day. Linda, look at this, I said, turning my screen toward her. Every single file Sarah downloaded has embedded authorship data. The algorithms, the client strategies, the retention models, they all trace back to my computer, my login credentials, my development timestamps. Patterson ended his first call with a grin. Tom Meridian just told me something very interesting. Hartwell's presentation this morning was delivered by someone named Robert Chen, not Sarah Walsh. When Tom asked about Sarah's role, Chen said she was a consultant who provided preliminary research. My phone rang again. This time, Sarah's voice was noticeably shaken. We need to talk, she said. I think we're done talking, Sarah. Hartwell's legal department is asking questions I can't answer. They want source documentation for all the methodologies I claim to develop. They want proof of concept, development timelines, testing protocols. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That sounds like your problem. They're threatening to void my contract if I can't prove intellectual ownership by Monday morning. I need those development files, the ones with my name attached. The ones that don't exist. Silence. Then, I'm prepared to make this worth your while. Hartwell's offering me $500,000 in licensing fees if I can prove legitimate ownership. I'll split it with you, $250,000 cash if you help me authenticate the documentation. Patterson was watching me intently, and I realized he was recording the call. Sarah, I said carefully, are you offering to pay me to help you commit fraud? I'm offering to compensate you for collaborative work that I did alone, in my apartment, on my personal computer, using methodologies I developed independently. Another long silence. Hartwell will destroy me if they find out. They already know, Patterson said, speaking up for the first time. I just spent 20 minutes on the phone with their managing partner. They've been suspicious since this morning when you couldn't answer basic questions about your own proprietary algorithms. I heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath through the speaker. They ran their own forensic analysis on the files you provided, I added. Every document traces back to our servers, our security certificates, our development environment. You didn't just steal my work, Sarah, you left a digital fingerprint trail that leads directly back to corporate espionage. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? Nothing, I said, and meant it. I want absolutely nothing from you. Because watching Sarah Walsh finally face the consequences of her own ambition was worth more than any amount of money. The line went dead. 2 hours later, Hartwell and Associates issued a press release announcing the termination of Sarah Walsh for material misrepresentation of qualifications and suspected intellectual property theft. By Friday, she was facing criminal charges. I finally stopped being the bigger person when I realized that sometimes justice requires getting your hands a little dirty. And it felt absolutely perfect.